Hello, thank you for joining us today in the webinar on how to build a world-class API ecosystem, a topic that requires much deliberation today as we've noticed the value chain in many industries morphing from a horizontal supply chain into a non-linear ecosystem. My name is Varun Providi and I'm a part of the product marketing team here at MuleSoft. I am joined today by Matt McLarty, our global lead on API strategy and API ecosystem development. Before we get started, I'd like to first say that our hearts go out to anyone who's been impacted by the COVID-19, either directly or indirectly. Our thoughts are especially with those who are sick, to whom we extend our heartfelt wishes for a full recovery. Our top priority remains keeping our customers, partners, employees, families, and communities as healthy and safe as possible. On the product front, MuleSoft remains committed to delivering the best technologies and solutions, as well as seamless service and support to help our customers' businesses during these trying times. We will maintain 24/7 support services, augmenting the team locally and cross-regionally as needed. Before we proceed with the webinar, a couple of housekeeping items. Afraid you'll miss something from the webinar? Don't fear, as a recording of this webinar will be distributed via email within 24 hours. If you have any questions, don't wait till the end of the webinar. Ask them right away and we'll answer it as best as possible at the end of the session. And lastly, we love feedback. Rate this webinar by selecting the survey widget at the bottom of the screen at any point during the webinar. What do we hope to take away? Today in this webinar, we will address these following questions. What are API ecosystems? And why are these API ecosystems so important in this API economy? How can developer portals help build, evolve, and grow your API ecosystems? And lastly, how can MuleSoft's API Community Manager help build a world-class API portal to make this happen? With that, I would like to pass it on to Matt McLarty to talk about API ecosystems, why are they important, and how can developer portals help? Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Varun. So when we talk about API ecosystems, I think a helpful way of understanding the value of ecosystems is to think about some of the business networks that we've seen be successful over a much longer period of time than what we're talking about with APIs. Specifically, if you look back at the industrial economy, really that came post-industrial revolution, a lot of the power and growth in that whole movement came from transportation advances, from stagecoaches to railways to trucking, and all the ability to move goods around really opened up new possibilities for the production of physical goods. You went from really siloed manufacturing in early factories into a much more sophisticated design now, where if you look at the automotive manufacturing space today, you are integrating multiple tiny parts into one product and then using distribution channels and transportation and logistics to work with dealer networks and beyond. So there's tremendous power in networks, even in the physical product space. So now we move into the digital space. Really, we're talking about how do you build networks for digital business. And APIs are a fundamental cog there, because it's APIs that are the conduit between partners that are really supplier of digital parts, third-party APIs that provide services, foundational services for building digital products, and then opening up digital product APIs that can be used further down the chain, used for distribution channels, used to be integrated into customer experiences. This just shows that we've had a successful template for the power of the network effect in business for centuries. It's not just a new digital thing, but it is different when it comes to digital, because a lot of the delays and costs associated with physical logistics go away in the digital world. So if we look at what goes into an API ecosystem, there's a lot of components. There's people, you've got customers, developers, partners who could play multiple roles, either as consumers themselves or as suppliers. To enable the APIs, you have platforms. We're going to talk quite a bit about the power of developer portals as a fundamental piece of that platform. But you've also got the integrated components around even the API itself. So the apps that are using the APIs built by developers, maybe third-party APIs that are pieces of the API itself, and then other tools that are going to help developers build and help partners integrate. And then finally, when you look at things from the business perspective, you've got the products and services themselves. When you put that lens on it, you can understand that a number of these components may be combined to build products or provide services. So really an API ecosystem is this collection of interconnected entities. And the power of the API ecosystem is not just to get your API off the ground, but this is really what builds the sustaining system, the integrated system that will bring success to your APIs and help to drive the business model that is going to make your APIs beneficial to your consumers and customers, as well as to your own bottom line. So today, I think we're fairly mature in the software engineering space. We're fairly mature with a number of companies, and most organizations, I think, have software-based systems, and they're taking advantage of that. But they're not all getting the full network effect of APIs, because today a lot of organizations have more siloed customer experiences where they've tried to build a complete stovepipe end-to-end with UI, with all the functions and features, and are trying to bring customers into their channels in order to provide their products. Some companies have good success there if they've got differentiating products, but they're not getting the full effect that they could have with a more mature digital ecosystem powered by APIs. So when you've got a powerful API ecosystem, you can find different captive audiences by offering out your products through APIs and reach a number of distribution partners. Those could be new channels, new captive spots where customers, potential customers, already go and can take advantage of your services. And there's a mutual benefit there because the partners now can offer a richer set of services and products on their own sites, so that's going to drive their business models as well. And I think we see a lot of these 1 + 1 = 3 type scenarios, again, going back in history in the business world, but really you can ramp up the speed of delivery in digital systems. There's actually a win-win-win effect here. It's not just mutual benefit between partners and suppliers, because not only are you helping your partners, but you're also helping to help your partners' consumers, and even finding your own consumers who might be, in some cases, other departments within your own organization who want to take advantage of the business capabilities that you're offering in new and interesting and innovative ways. It could be consumers from your partners who want to build new experiences for new segments of customers, or it could be customers themselves who have a big enough need that they're going to build systems that are going to take advantage of your APIs. But once again, this is really to show that the complexity of an ecosystem has a non-linear benefit as you add more and more capabilities, expose more capabilities, unbundle some of the functions away from your business. They can be used in new and interesting contexts. We've been working with organizations around the world to help them on their API journeys. We talk about this API strategy blueprint, and this is where we're helping define an API program that will help organizations take maximum benefit from APIs. We start with really defining the strategy. What are the goals, business goals, defining the mission for an organization, how they want to execute their APIs. We look into the organizational dynamics, especially to understand some of the constraints and obstacles that might be in the organization, to get a feel for how the culture works, to see what kind of a program would fit. And then we really, within that context, think about the technology pieces and technological capabilities and standards that are required to build a foundational platform for APIs. But the thing that really drives the business value of the whole API strategy is this understanding of the ecosystem. It's taking the API product candidates that you may have and defining a business model that will help you flush out those entities and components that are going to drive success for your APIs. Because again, designing an API ecosystem, really moving to connecting all these different pieces and identifying who your partners might be, is really going to drive the thing that drives your business, which is consumption of your APIs. A lot of API programs have spent time just focusing on, hey, let's build a whole bunch of APIs. If you don't have that major focus on consumption of those APIs, then chances are you're not going to be successful from a business standpoint. And it really all starts with the consumer. If you've started by just looking at, hey, what do we have? What can we build? That's kind of doing things in reverse. You really want to start with the outside-in customer experience thinking. And really, even though your APIs may not be customer-facing, like end-user facing, understanding who the potential end users are, real end customers who can benefit from your APIs, is going to guide you to the most valuable API products that you can identify. So start there. I think there's some principles that need to be adopted in order to be successful with an API ecosystem. It's all about openness and experimentation. And this really causes a lot of established companies who've had success in building those siloed business models, which have been successful in the past. This is not intuitive, or it's not in the nature of a lot of organizations. And it is important to fight that, to really embrace the openness, to be ready to expose things that may not have been exposed before, and especially to be ready to actually declare failure on some of those things. Because, when it comes to that partner onboarding experience, as an example, in the past, there would be a lot of big bets made and contracts signed and selection process before you'd ever even actually interact with potential partners. That's expensive if things don't go well. If you can open up APIs as a new channel for partners, and it allows both parties to enter into an experimental partnership without risk, or with much less risk, and then decide whether or not there's anything there. So that openness and experimentation is fundamental to really drive the agility that's needed in the digital economy. Defining the API business model, I mentioned this, and it's so important because if you can come up with APIs that are really in high demand and drive a lot of consumption, but that could potentially just end up driving cost for your organization and not drive any revenue, right? Or you could come up with something that you can see would drive a ton of revenue for your organization, but if nobody's interested in it, then it's not going to work. So really finding that balance between what's going to be useful for your partners and consumers and their end customers, and what is going to be profitable for you. And there's a lot of different business models that are out there in the API world. A lot of people think of opening up their data and charging for it, and that's the business model, but that's not necessarily the case. That might work for something like Google Maps APIs or Twilio communication, things that are really fundamental capabilities that are built into a business model. But if you look at companies like Lyft, who are doing ride sharing, they're going to be charging for their rides. They're going to open up their APIs without charging for them because that allows them to drive their core business model around consumer ride sharing. In the theme of openness and experimentation, working with partners, allowing innovation to happen outside your walls is something that, again, goes counterintuitive to the way a lot of organizations have run, but it's something that's fundamental in the digital economy. There's great examples of this, such as how, when Netflix moved to streaming and really wanted to gain ubiquity in the video streaming space, they had a choice to either develop their own clients on all these different platforms, from set-top boxes to gaming consoles to web browsers and so on, or they could farm that out and open up an API and allow the experts on those platforms to build. And that's what they did, which allowed them to get that ubiquity much more quickly. Designing and delivering API products. A lot of the time when we think about API design, we're thinking about creating specifications for encoding data and so on, very technical stuff. But really, APIs, when done effectively, and especially in an ecosystem that involves more than just one organization, building them as products in the way that they're packaged, in the way that they're documented, in terms of the warnings and characteristics of the APIs, and especially in terms of the user experience, or in this case, developer experience. Having that API design, being very intentional, and even thinking through your product plans, how you're going to market, how you're going to support it, all that is fundamental to the design and ultimate long-term success. Again, because it's going to drive repeat consumption of your APIs. And that's the ultimate goal of the ecosystem. Continually drive consumption. continually, and that's not just to say, get everybody in the world consuming your APIs, because that might not drive your business model effectively. This is really about driving API consumption that drives your business model. And in some cases, that might mean actually shutting down some consumption that's not strategic for your business and focusing on the consumers that are really going to drive that business model. And really, to complete the circle, it's about, with all this information, with all of the digital touch points that you have in your API ecosystem, being able to observe what's happening, measure it, and then iterate and adjust as you go along, and going back through this process, recognizing that this whole thing is a cycle, that you're going to go back and tweak your design to fit new unfolding customer experiences and go through all these pieces again. So looking at that list, you can see a lot of that would be evident and driven by an API portal. This is really the front door to the API ecosystem, and especially the front door to getting your consumers consuming your APIs. And it really is geared towards those developers in your consuming organization, whether they're partner developers or unknown third-party developers, or even developers within your own organization that are going to be consuming your APIs. The more you understand about those consumers, the more intentional you can be about how you engage with them. And having a portal is, it's, as long as there's been an API economy, there have been API portals. Now, interestingly, I think a lot of API portal offerings that have been out in the market for a long time have kind of gone with this very developer-centric kind of model, and a lot of technical specifications built in, and that's very important from a developer experience perspective. But I think if you have this ecosystem understanding, it helps to recognize that there's other personalities involved, other roles involved, and other entities to consider. And so when you're building your API portal, it's good to understand that this is really the conduit for your digital business and not just a place where people kind of statically look at API specifications. And the API portal, I think it is a way of really signaling to your consumers that there is a place that they can go and trust your organization. They can go and get to start on things quickly. If we look at what would happen in the past, especially inside an organization. So for organizations that have had APIs around for a while, a lot of times to try and use an API would require looking up some cryptic documentation, looking into, calling a developer who's maybe the only person who knows the code, having them explain it to you. Very arduous process. In fact, in a recent podcast, we were talking with Lorinda Brandon, who's an engineering director at Twilio, and she was talking about developing APIs quite a few years ago, how the API portal was actually a 250-page PDF document, right? That's not what you want. That's not what your consumers want. You want to have a place that gives you that kind of seamless, almost tablet-like experience where you can find what you're looking for, have it presented in a very positive, experiential way, and really have multiple entry points. So if you're just getting started, giving you a place to just kick the tires. If you want more than that, you can go deeper. So with that, really, the rest of the webinar, we'd like to focus on API portals. So I'm going to hand it back to Varun to talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Matt. Until now, we have discussed API ecosystems, why they're important, and how developer portals can help engage and grow your ecosystems. Now, let's take a look at how you can build such a world-class API portal. MuleSoft, with the help of Programmable Web, has distilled best practices on what constitutes a state-of-the-art API portal by working with the leaders in the API economy. For your API portal to provide a next-gen consumer experience, it should act as a communication nucleus, that is, a single source of truth for all the information about your APIs. And it should provide frictionless onboarding. In other words, the time to hello world while working with an API should be as minimum as possible. Your API portals are the face of your organization for the API consumers. So, like a bank with strong walls, your API portals should signal trust for your consumers. Finally, API portals are not just about API references. They should support the developers and consumers every step of the way in consuming the API. Let us start with the first principle, treating the API portals as a communication nucleus. APIs have moved beyond being an IT concern, and choosing them now involves numerous organizational stakeholders. In terms of non-developers, that audience includes business partners, executives from other organizations who are often looking for partners to help them co-create better end-to-end consumer experiences. At this stage of their API discovery, the decision makers need to understand exactly what your API does, how it fits within their business, and how the API can solve their specific problems. A clearly articulated value proposition helps decision makers understand easily what your APIs can do for them. Not only the value proposition, but going a step beyond to explain the use cases, help executive and product level personas help understand all the possibilities enabled by your APIs. Providing real life examples allows developers to dive deep into the real world customer solutions and help decision makers understand the product benefits, demonstrating trustworthiness by showing how others have used it successfully. As part of helping users understand both your company and its API, you also need to publish a clearly written developer or API terms of service. Too many providers only have a general terms of service that either neglects to specify the terms for using the API or doesn't mention the API or platform at all. Providing an overview of the business model and pricing page helps set the right expectations for the API consumers in terms of costs and usage limits, eventually driving them to a decision on how to engage with your APIs faster. Let us dive into a demonstration on how MuleSoft's API Community Manager can help design your API portal as a communication nucleus. What we are looking at here is a demo portal for a fictitious organization called Northern Trail Outfitters, or NTO, built with MuleSoft's API Community Manager. This is a fully branded pixel-perfect experience for the API consumers of NTO. The portal is designed to act as a single point of engagement for both technical and business stakeholders looking to learn everything about the APIs and the company. On scrolling down, we notice dedicated sections for exciting announcements, news, and blog posts provided by NTO. Each customizable component has been fine-tuned through Salesforce work in Community Cloud, spanning millions of customers and partner communities, enabling customers to immediately leverage all those best practices. What we also notice here is the API reference tab. Going beyond just an API reference, we see that the APIs on the portal are organized into catalog for technical audiences looking for a specific API and into use cases for business audience looking to understand how these APIs can help their businesses. Diving deep into the use cases section, we see that the NTO APIs have been organized into 3 use case categories: products, pricing, and shopper. In each section, we see well-defined descriptions, benefits, and use cases to help understand all the possibilities enabled by a set of APIs. In this journey as an API consumer, I'm now interested in the solutions enabled by the product API. So I click into the product API details to find out more about the product API. What we notice here is a clearly articulated value proposition for the product API, detailing exactly how it fits into my business as an API consumer. Now that I'm interested in the API, I would also like to understand what to expect from it. There are clearly outlined terms and conditions and pricing instructions. Taking a step back from this journey, what we went through here are 2 stages in the API discovery for a consumer. A journey through overall core services of NTO exposed through NTO APIs, through use cases, and an API specific journey clearly exposing the API as a product. API Community Manager helps you build these flows very, very quickly with Lightning components and Exchange at its foundation. You've managed to convey the value of your API, describe what it can do, and explain how it can solve a user's problems. If all has gone correctly, the potential user will want to try out the API. And for those developers, you need to be able to onboard them to your APIs with as little friction as possible. This is a critical part of the developer experience. Once developers register, most naturally, they'll look for a getting started guide, a step-by-step process to take them from understanding about the API to implementation. Once the developers are comfortable using your API and have begun working with it, the reference is where they'll go when they run into a specific issue. At the heart of any portal is the API reference, which helps users understand how to use the API. The reference needs to be complete with detailed notes on each function along with detailed description on the functions of each of the HTTP methods. Going beyond the basics, providing descriptions on how to use each methods with sample use cases helps developers explore the APIs easily and very quickly. Now, what really differentiates a good API reference from a regular one is the ability for the developer to interact and experiment with the API in the portal. No matter how you implement it, interactivity adds value to users of all levels by demonstrating the API's actual behaviors, thus increasing their understanding of the API as well. A console like MuleSoft's mocking service provides users with a way to interact with the API so they can explore various resources, sometimes using live data. A console may allow them to compose requests with various optional parameters, view the server's responses, and perhaps export the corresponding curl commands. Let us take a look at how MuleSoft's API Community Manager can help your developers reach the Hello World API stage faster. Picking up from where we left off in the API consumer journey. Once, as a consumer, when I'm interested in the API, I want my time spent from discovery to go live for an API to be as minimal as possible. What we see here is a set of self-service tools and dynamic documentation to help test the API. APIs are published directly from Exchange with auto-generated self-service documentation, tools, and an interactive console. From the basic details like API documentation on methods to little pleasantries like providing references in multiple languages, API Community Managers got you covered in providing a next-generation developer experience. The mocking service provides an interactive console for me to try out the API. If I still have any further questions on the API, I can quickly visit the feedback and discussions to find out the answers from the community, or in fact, even reach out to the NTO support team to find out more about the NTO experience. And here we see a simplified developer experience to get me started with the APIs. Normally, it's hard for a developer to necessarily know what needs to be done next, even when they've found an API they want to use. With the experience of communities at its bedrock, Lightning components provide the ability for cross-functional teams like developers, marketing, technical writers to design a step-by-step guided journey, or as we referred to earlier as Time to Hello World API. With all this, I'm confident about the API and have decided to request access. From the moment visitors come to an API provider's portal to begin the discovery process, the portal is sending out signals about the trustworthiness of the API and its provider as well. Think of a very reliable bank. Do you imagine a small shop in a back alley? Or do you think of huge buildings with strong walls? These signals often work in conjunction with an API's portal's ability to educate users and help them feel that they have made the best choice. Branding your API portals to reflect your business strategy helps lay a strong foundation for your developer relations and engagement. A key component in establishing trust with the API consumers is for the organizations to have well-defined developer relations and outreach. Developer engagement is the tissue that stitches an API ecosystem together. When developers see a community that's actively engaged, it serves as a testament to well-supported and well-established API products. Lastly, the biggest hurdle in the choice of a developer to implement an API in their system are the changes to the API. What would happen if the API changes in the future without letting us know? Providing a clear view of the roadmap and keeping them up to date with news and recent developments gives developer a nice long runway to adjust to your roadmap, especially if it involves any breaking changes to the API. Let us take a look at how MuleSoft's API Community Manager can help you build portals that signal trust to your API consumers. As we've seen earlier in the demonstration, API Community Manager lets you customize the developer portal either with simple clicks or with code down to the last pixel. This helps you brand your communities the way you want. Another vital aspect in driving a successful developer relation strategy is engagement with out-of-the-box components like blogs, news, and forums. API Community Manager brings together teams like marketing and IT in driving engagement with API consumers and keeping the consumer up to date with the roadmap of API products. Eventually, your users will be comfortable using your API and will begin to develop their apps. In the beginning, you can expect them to refer to the API reference on a regular basis, but along the way, they're bound to need help with their niche problems, some of which cannot be addressed by your portal. Building portals with easily accessible and readily available support functionalities is the key to help developers take the leap of faith with your solution. This is where your portal should aspire to provide two types of support. One, which is provided by your team, and the second one, which is provided by the community. API portals also serve as a way to bring the developer community together to pool their experiences. Through this central support area, members can often reach each other for assistance on any common issues that arise. The most common method seen in the portals is the community forums. Lastly, engagement in ecosystems requires consistent measurement and validation. As community administrators, you need to understand and analyze ecosystem health with KPIs like community size, activity, and engagement. Treating API consumers as customers, their traffic, engagement, and activities need to be analyzed consistently in order to improve the overall health of the ecosystem. Let us take a look at how MuleSoft's API Community Manager's case management and developer engagement capabilities, along with a powerful analytics engine, can help you build a self-service support hub in the form of an API portal. API Community Manager helps you create a self-service support hub. In other words, providing API consumers like myself everything they need at every stage of the journey. With out-of-the-box integrations with other Salesforce platform components like Service Cloud, organizations like NTO can provide org-specific support with case management and community-based support with curated forums and discussions. With a 360-degree view of the customers, agents can solve cases more efficiently than ever. NTO can also provide AI-based recommendations with the power of Einstein. Now let's switch to NTO's perspective and see the tools at their disposal to engage and grow their developer community. This is the API Community Command Center. Here, admins can understand and analyze ecosystem health using pre-built dashboards and reports on KPIs like community size, activity, engagement, and so on. They also see on the bottom left the set of most common actions, enabling the admins to quickly navigate to key capabilities like making an announcement or moderating a forum post. With simple clicks, NTO can also build API consumer journey funnels, segment the ecosystem, or even drill down to each customer level. This is very, very powerful for NTO in defining their API programs. Based on the analytics provided from an ecosystem level down to a single person, NTO can drive the pipeline of leads from initial visitors through to live APIs in production. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Like with existing customers, API Community Manager can help you unlock your core services, drive collaboration across internal and external communities, and harness the creative ideas from the broader ecosystem. We wanted to leave you with one final parting thought. Your API portal is not just a library of API documentation, nor should it be a shiny new shingle to sell your API products. It is a conduit to build and grow your API ecosystems, eventually powering new digital experiences. So, at what stage of the journey are you in right now? Do you have a well-defined roadmap for your ecosystem? Have you defined what success looks like to you? Reach out to us at MuleSoft if you're struggling with any of these questions with your API ecosystems. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining the webinar today. Now I think we'll take a couple of questions. The first one being, most of the APIs we're managing are internal. How can API portals or API ecosystems help us? Probably I think this is the perfect question where Matt, who's on the call as well, to kick things off.
Sure, and thanks Varun, and thanks everyone for joining the webinar. Hopefully it was helpful with lots of engagement in the questions, which is great. Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious, or well, not totally obvious. There's lots of work to be done, but it's a little more intuitive when you see examples of APIs that are external products, that are maybe revenue-generating products, core products for an organization offered to third parties, as to just how valuable the API ecosystem is, and that's certainly where a lot of the learnings are and best practices have come from mature organizations who've been in that space for more than 10 years. But it's equally important when your focus of your API strategy is on internal APIs. You still the best practices still apply. So if you are a lot of organizations, one of the big things they need to overcome when they're doing integration work is really decoupling the work efforts within the organization. Sure, everyone's been through experiences of large, expensive enterprise programs that require a whole lot of coordination and management because all the efforts are dependent and it's hard for them to be decoupled. So APIs provide a way of decoupling that and taking the approach of managing your internal APIs as products, thinking through what the business model is for the API. What is it going to look like over time to drive value for your organization through the API? Understanding what the right consumption is, what's the consumption profile that's going to match the successful business model, who are the developer groups that are building applications that are going to drive that consumption, and even looking at your own dependencies for the API and how you can decouple from your own dependencies. All that ecosystem thinking is fundamentally important to drive towards some of the more common high-level organizational goals we have for internal API-led connectivity, such as driving higher velocity delivery, being more agile and responsive to market demands, reducing lead times for projects, and so on. So there's a lot of, when you look at a lot of the goals that organizations have, and the reason they move to internal APIs, certainly the ecosystem approach helps achieve those. And also, when you're building your APIs internally that way, it helps to position you for even turning some of those capabilities into external services down the road.
Thanks, Matt. I think that really helps clear things up because that is one of the most common questions we continuously get as well on how can ecosystems actually help for internal APIs. Moving on to the next question, this seems like a lot of information. While there is a lot of big picture thinking, and what are the 2-3 most important things to get me started with development?
And it's a great point. I think the first thing to say is, to really get sustained value out of APIs, there aren't any shortcuts. right? But I think this is a question that reflects where a lot of organizations are. People understand the big picture, that the value proposition that APIs offer, but they're really struggling with what is the starting point. And I would say, first of all, it's just to be really clear on what your goals are for using APIs, because you can look at the full benefit list and say, yeah, I want all of that, but trying to achieve, an organizational agility and external products, and maybe there's some compliance needs. Like, there's a lot of ways that you can go after it. So I think the first thing is to really determine what are your primary business goals for moving this in this direction. From there, I think you need to really think clearly about what are the API products that are going to be strategic for me in that regard, right? Because I think there's a lot of foundational infrastructural pieces that you need to lay down as well. But what's going to guide you effectively, I think, is identifying a roadmap of API products that are going to lead, that are strategic and are going to help deliver your goals. And from there, really, I think defining the business model for those API products is what will help to really flesh out the whole ecosystem and understand who the end users and developer communities and organizations and partners you need to work with, as well as the underlying technology enablers and tools and so on. I think that's the right starting point. And the thing is that if you have some strategic API products in mind and you move down that path, then you'll be able to apply the approach. You'll be able to learn the approach, deliver value, and then apply the approach in other contexts later on.
Perfect. I think we also have another question that will be a proper segue from here, Matt. It is, what is the strategy to map the API building model with a business use case requirement? For example, building an API for authentication would have different success metrics for each organization.
Yeah, and I think this again comes back to the business model thinking. So for sure, if we take that API for authentication as an example, you look at how does that tie back to some business objective. So it could be that one of the concerns is that we know now that if we're moving to API-led approach and we're going to be opening things up, we want to open them up responsibly. We want to have a consistent way across the organization of delivering API, an authentication API. So some of the activities that would result from that would be, figuring out what the metrics are that determine whether you're being successful with that API, figuring out how you enable the developers in the organization who are going to be building APIs to ensure they're using the standard approach for authentication. That's definitely a cross-cutting one, which would be very different than, let's say, a bank that wanted to offer some, peer-to-peer payment API that would be used in conjunction with other financial service providers, where there'd be some monetization goals that would be different from the security goals of the authentication API. So I think that it's again, it comes back to determining what type of business model that you're going to be using, and in fact, we have a lot of we're going to be publishing soon a lot of information around updated business models for APIs that I think will be helpful here.
Perfect. And just to add on to Matt's point, I think for very specific use cases to organizations as well, Matt leads another API programs workshops where he helps organizations think through these kind of use cases much more in detail. Just to add to that, Matt. Couple of questions on API Community Manager. So is there any access control on the portals opening up some APIs for specific groups and some to the open world? And how can API Community Manager help build for specific use cases? Definitely. API Community Manager as a product is built on two very strong platforms. One is on the Anypoint Exchange, which helps you manage the API lifecycle, and based on the foundation of Community Cloud from Salesforce as well, which helps you manage and engage, build and grow the communities. So this is the Community Manager is a product that is built on these two foundations. So you can actually control the access at two different levels. From Exchange, you can expose specific APIs only for a given curated set of audience. And if that also doesn't work, you can even personalize your portals using the API Community Manager to expose the portal some specific capabilities only to a curated audience. And you can keep changing what portal is seen to the external audience based on the use case requirement. I think with that, we are almost at time. I know there are a ton of questions we couldn't get to. We'll definitely get back to you, but we want to address one simple question before we move on. A couple of questions we had were on the recording of the webinar. The recording of the webinar will definitely be available after this webinar gets over, and we'll definitely try to get back to your questions as soon as possible. Thanks a lot for joining, everyone, and stay safe.
Thank you very much.